The chamber of the Galactic Council shimmered with controlled light, each surface reflecting power, history, and absolute certainty. They had seen everything. Civilizations rising from ash, empires collapsing under their own weight, wars calculated down to the last breath. Nothing surprised them anymore. Especially not humans. "They call them special forces," said Delegate Vrax, his voice smooth, edged with quiet amusement. "A rare classification, elite, highly trained, highly effective." The holographic projection in the center of the chamber flickered to life. Dark corridors, flickering emergency lights. A human squad moved through the wreckage like shadows given purpose. 8 figures, black armor, no wasted movement. A door exploded inward. Gunfire erupted short, controlled bursts. 32 hostiles. Gone in 12 seconds. The footage froze on the final frame. One human standing still, scanning, breathing steady, as if nothing extraordinary had just happened. Silence followed. Then, "They are efficient," one counselor admitted. "Predictably so," another added. Vrax's form rippled slightly, almost amused. "And yet they isolate such efficiency into specialized units. They elevate them, worship them." A low murmur spread through the chamber. Primitive behavior. Inefficient resource distribution. Conclusion, the High Arbiter asked. Vrax didn't hesitate. "Remove or overwhelm their elite units, and the rest will collapse." The decision came easily. Too easily. "Authorize controlled engagement," the Arbiter declared. "Target a minor human colony, deploy standard forces only, no escalation." No one objected. Because in their minds, the outcome was already known. Theta 9 was not important. That was precisely why it was chosen. A quiet human colony orbiting a dim star, agricultural grids, mining outposts, a population that barely registered on galactic scales. No heavy defenses. No elite presence. Perfect. The invasion began at dawn. The sky didn't darken all at once. It fractured. Burning streaks tore through the upper atmosphere as Cathari dropships descended in flawless formation. Their hulls glowed with heat, carving lines of fire across the sky like a warning too late to matter. Sirens wailed below. Civilians ran. Automated defenses activated briefly. Then disappeared. Precision strikes. Calculated removal. "Surface resistance minimal," reported Command Unit K-47, voice calm, detached. "Primary sectors secured within projections." Cathari soldiers advanced through the streets with disciplined efficiency. Their armor gleamed, their movements synchronized, their weapons devastating. This wasn't a battle. It was a procedure. Clean. Controlled. Expected. But war rarely announces the moment it stops being predictable. It slips. Quietly. In a signal most would have ignored. Deep within a damaged comm tower, barely holding together, a human operator forced a transmission through collapsing systems. Blood ran down his face, one eye swollen shut. Static screamed across the channel. Still he spoke. "This is Theta 9. We are under attack. Repeat, this is not a drill." Explosions shook the structure. He coughed, struggling to stay conscious. "Any unit, any ship we need." The signal cut. Then came back weaker. "Please." And then, silence. 6 light-years away, in a region of space most fleets avoided, a lone human cruiser drifted among broken debris. It was not impressive. Its hull bore scars from battles long forgotten. One engine flickered inconsistently. Weapon systems were outdated, patched, barely holding operational status. It wasn't elite. It wasn't special. It was overlooked. Inside, the crew moved with the quiet rhythm of routine. Until the signal came through. Static filled the bridge. Then the voice. Broken. Desperate. Real. Captain Elia's rook didn't move at first. He just listened. Every word. Every crack of fear barely held together by duty. When it ended, the silence on the bridge felt heavier than any explosion. No authentication codes, one officer said cautiously, could be a trap. Or interference. Or outdated distress. Rook stood slowly. His eyes didn't leave the dark viewport ahead. Run it again. They did. Same voice. Same desperation. Same ending. Please. The word lingered like a weight pressing into every chest on the bridge. Nearest confirmed fleet, Rook asked. 3 jumps out, came the reply. Minimum response time too late. A pause. The kind that defines everything that comes after. We're not authorized, the navigation officer added carefully. Another pause. Then, Rook exhaled. Set course for Theta 9. Silence snapped across the bridge. Sir, the weapons officer began, hesitant. We're alone, if this is an active invasion. It is, Rook cut in quietly. No anger. No hesitation. Just certainty. The crew exchanged glances. Not fear. Not doubt. Understanding. Because they all knew what this meant. No reinforcements. No safety net. Just them. Course plotted, Helm said finally. Rook nodded once. Engage. The engines roared to life, uneven, strained, but determined. The cruiser turned. Not away from danger, but directly toward it. Back on Theta 9, the Cathari commander stepped over a fallen human defender. He didn't look down. Didn't need to. Victory was already assumed. Sector 3 secured, a soldier reported. Minimal resistance remains. The commander nodded. Efficient. Predictable. Then his visor flickered. A signal. Small. Insignificant. A single human vessel exiting warp at the system's edge. The commander tilted his head slightly. Identify. Unregistered military cruiser, the system replied. Outdated, damaged. A pause. Then a quiet, dismissive sound. One ship, a subordinate asked. The commander almost laughed. Not even one of their elite units, he said, curious. High above the planet, Rook's cruiser tore into real space. The sight below was enough. Cities burning. Defense grids gone. Enemy ships controlling orbit like it was already theirs. Rook leaned forward. Comms. Opened. Broadcast on all frequencies. The officer hesitated. Message, sir. Rook watched the enemy fleet move in perfect formation. Cold. Precise. Certain. Then he spoke. Tell them. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The common army just arrived. On the surface, scattered human survivors heard it. Some froze. Some didn't believe it. Some smiled despite everything. Because that sentence meant one thing. They weren't alone anymore. The Cathari commander received the transmission seconds later. He listened. Once. Then again. The words didn't match the data. Common army. This. One damaged ship. It didn't make sense. It didn't follow logic. And then, the human cruiser accelerated. Not retreating. Not holding position. Charging. Straight toward the Cathari fleet. Weapons powering up. Engines screaming beyond safe limits. The commander's posture shifted slightly. Confusion. Then something else. Something unfamiliar. Intercept it, he ordered. But for the first time since the invasion began. The situation didn't feel controlled. Far away, within the council chamber, observers leaned forward as new data streamed in. Single human vessel engaging entire force. That is irrational. No, one analyst whispered, eyes locked on the feed. Not irrational. Deliberate. And as the lone cruiser opened fire, outnumbered, outgunned, and utterly unafraid, a realization began forming. Small, unwelcome, dangerous. Because if this was how humans fought when they were not special, then the Council hadn't just underestimated an enemy. They had misunderstood an entire species. The Cathari commander had fought in 17 campaigns. He had crushed rebellions before they could breathe, dismantled fleets that believed themselves untouchable, and watched entire species surrender after a single calculated strike. War to him was not chaos. It was structure, predictable, manageable, controlled. So when the human cruiser accelerated directly toward his formation, he didn't feel fear. He felt irritation. "One vessel," he said, voice steady. "Forward batteries only, do not waste resources." Acknowledgements echoed instantly. Cathari ships shifted, precise, synchronized, flawless. Targeting systems locked within milliseconds. The human cruiser burned forward anyway. Its trajectory wasn't evasive. It wasn't cautious. It was direct, almost reckless. "Firing solution confirmed," an officer reported. "Execute." The void erupted. Lances of energy tore through space, converging on the approaching human ship. The first impact struck its forward armor, flaring bright against weakened shielding. On the bridge of Rook's cruiser, everything shook. Direct hit. Shields dropping 40%, 30. "Hold it together," Rook said, gripping the edge of the command console. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Around him, his crew moved with urgency, but not panic. Because panic wasted time. And time was the one thing they didn't have. "Return fire," Rook ordered. The weapons officer hesitated. "Sir, they're out of range for optimal." "Fire." Missiles launched, but not toward the Cathari warships. They streaked past them, diving lower, toward the planet, toward impact trajectories, the Cathari tactical officer asked, confused. The data flickered, updated, shifted, and then, "Landing craft," he said slowly. The commander's gaze sharpened. The missiles slammed into descending transports, ships packed with Cathari reinforcements. Explosions ripped through the atmosphere, scattering debris and fire across the sky. More missiles followed. Supply barges, orbital relays, communication nodes. One by one, they vanished in controlled bursts of destruction. "This is inefficient," one Cathari officer said, disbelief creeping in. "They're ignoring primary targets." "No," the commander said quietly. His eyes narrowed. "They are removing our stability." On the human cruiser, alarms screamed louder. Multiple hull breaches. Engine output unstable. Shields collapsing. "Keep pushing," Rook said. He didn't look at the damage reports. Didn't need to. He could feel it in the vibrations beneath his boots, in the strain of the ship fighting to stay intact. "Next targets." "Supply chain clusters," the weapons officer replied, already adjusting. Rook nodded once. "Hit them." More missiles fired. Less precise now, but still deliberate. Because this wasn't about accuracy anymore. It was about disruption. On the surface of Theta 9, the sky changed. Where once it had burned with controlled descent, now it exploded with chaos. Transports spiraled out of control. Debris rained down. Cathari formations faltered as supplies failed to arrive, communication signals flickering in and out. And in that sudden fracture of order, something unexpected happened. Humans moved. In a shattered residential block, a group of civilians huddled in silence. Then a crate slammed into the ground nearby. Metal cracked open. Inside, weapons, old models, standard issue, but functional. A young woman stared at them, breathing hard. "We can't," someone started. "We have to," she said, already picking one up. Her hands shook, but she didn't drop it. Because somewhere above them, someone had just made a choice. And that choice gave them one too. Back in orbit, the Cathari commander watched the battlefield shift. Not collapse. Shift. Ground resistance increasing, a soldier reported. That is not possible, another replied. They were neutralized. Apparently not. The commander's tone had changed. Subtle, but real. Because the pattern no longer matched expectation. Redirect aerial support, he ordered. Suppress emerging resistance. But even as he spoke, another alert flared. Command relay offline. Supply route disrupted. Landing reinforcements reduced by 40%. How, a Cathari officer demanded. The answer was obvious. The human ship. Still advancing. Still firing. Still refusing to die. Sir, we can't sustain this, Rook's engineer shouted. The cruiser lurched violently as another blast tore through its side. Reactor strain critical. Rook wiped blood from his brow, barely noticing when it got there. Then we don't sustain it, he said. A pause. Confusion. What? We break them before we break. The words settled over the bridge. Heavy, final, and understood. New firing solution, the weapons officer said, voice tight. Enemy command ship. The Cathari commander's vessel. The heart of their coordination. Do it, Rook said. No clear shot, we'd have to push through their main formation. Rook didn't hesitate. Then push. The cruiser surged forward. Straight into the densest cluster of enemy ships. Enemy fire intensified instantly. Impacts slammed into the hull, one after another, ripping armor apart, exposing internal structure. Hull integrity down to 60%. 50. 40. Still it moved. Still it fought. The Cathari commander watched the human ship approach. Closer. Closer than any rational enemy would allow. Why, one of his officers whispered. No answer came. Because this wasn't strategy they recognized. This wasn't caution. This wasn't survival. This was something else. Something dangerous. Target lock, the human weapons officer shouted. Fire. Everything the cruiser had left erupted in a single, concentrated strike. The blast tore through defensive screens, slamming into the Cathari command ship. Not enough to destroy it, but enough to... Command systems disrupted, a Cathari voice snapped. Signal interference. Formation instability detected. Across the battlefield, Cathari ships hesitated. Just for a moment. A fraction of a second. But in war, that was everything. Below, human resistance surged. Coordinated now. Aggressive. Alive. The Cathari commander steadied himself, gripping the console. Regain control, he ordered sharply. But his voice no longer carried certainty. Because for the first time, he wasn't observing a controlled engagement. He was reacting. On the human cruiser, systems flickered dangerously. Sir, we're not going to last much longer. Rook stared at the burning planet below. At the chaos they had created. At the fight they had reignited. Good, he said quietly. Because that was never the goal. The Cathari commander looked again at the human ship. Damaged. Breaking apart. Still coming. Still fighting. And in that moment, he understood something deeply unsettling. This enemy wasn't trying to win cleanly. They weren't trying to preserve themselves. They weren't even fighting for advantage. They were fighting to make sure no one walked away untouched. And as the crippled human cruiser pushed even deeper into their formation, bleeding fire shaking apart but refusing to stop, the Cathari commander felt it. Clear, unavoidable, unfamiliar, fear, because this wasn't how inferior forces behaved. This wasn't how common soldiers fought. And if this was humanity's baseline, then the Council had made a mistake far worse than underestimation. They had chosen the wrong kind of enemy. And the human ship. It still hadn't finished. The sky was no longer controlled. It was broken. Burning fragments of Cathari transports rained across Theta 9, carving fire through streets that had once been quiet, predictable, safe. Smoke twisted upward in thick columns, turning day into something dim and choking. For the Cathari, the plan had been simple. Land secure, stabilize. Instead, the ground beneath them had changed. Not in structure, in behavior. Reinforcement waves disrupted, a Cathari officer reported, voice tight. Surface units operating without full support. The commander's gaze hardened. Then they will proceed as trained. But even as he said it, new data flickered across his display. Human activity. Not fleeing. Not hiding. Moving. The first confirmed engagement came from Sector 12. A Cathari squad advanced through a residential block, weapons raised, formation tight. Thermal scans showed movement inside a collapsed building. Flush them out, the squad leader ordered. A charge detonated. The wall shattered inward. They entered, and the floor collapsed beneath them. 2 soldiers dropped instantly into a concealed pit lined with sharpened metal debris. Before the others could react, gunfire erupted from above, from behind, from places that hadn't shown up on scans. 3 more Cathari fell. The survivors fired back, precise, controlled. But their enemy wasn't there anymore. Gone. Ambush, 1 soldier hissed. Impossible, another replied. No organized command. Another shot rang out. He dropped mid-sentence. Across the city, the same pattern repeated. Cathari units advanced. Humans didn't meet them head-on. They redirected, disrupted, vanished, and struck again somewhere else. In what used to be a transit station, a group of humans gathered around a cracked tactical display. None of them wore matching uniforms. One still had grease stains across his arms, a mechanic. Another carried medical supplies, strapped awkwardly over scavenged armor. A third barely looked old enough to be holding a weapon. Routes are collapsing, the mechanic said, adjusting the flickering map. They can't stabilize landing zones. Good, the medic replied. That means they bleed. Yeah, the younger one muttered, gripping his rifle tighter. So do we. A moment of silence. Then, we don't outgun them, the mechanic said. We outthink them. The others nodded. Because this wasn't about rank. Or training manuals. This was about survival. Above them, the human cruiser roared across the sky, trailing fire. Every pass it made changed something on the ground. A destroyed supply line. A disrupted signal. A moment of confusion in the enemy ranks. And every moment, the humans below used it. Command, we are encountering unpredictable resistance, a Cathari unit reported. Clarify, the commander demanded. They do not hold positions, they do not defend traditionally, they adapt. The words sounded wrong in their language. Uncomfortable. Then force them into structure, the commander replied. Pin them, contain them. But containment required predictability. And humans were no longer predictable. In Sector 9, a Cathari column advanced through a narrow street. Perfect formation. Weapons scanning. No heat signatures. No movement. Too quiet. Proceed, the squad leader ordered. They stepped forward, and the buildings on both sides detonated. Not fully. Not enough to destroy. Just enough to collapse debris into the street. Trapping them. Before they could regroup, human fighters emerged from hidden positions, windows, rooftops, alleyways. Gunfire erupted. Close. Relentless. Messy. The Cathari fought back, cutting down several attackers instantly. But for every human that fell, 2 more took their place. Not coordinated. Not synchronized. Driven. Where is their command structure? A Cathari officer demanded over comms. We cannot identify it, came the response. Units appear to operate independently. That wasn't possible, not in any effective military model. And yet, they were effective. The Cathari commander watched the live feed in silence. Every projection had assumed human resistance would collapse without elite leadership, without centralized command, without structured control. Instead, it had fragmented and grown stronger. Adjust strategy, he ordered slowly. Increase suppression measures, eliminate population clusters. A pause. Even his own officers hesitated. Do it, he repeated, because if they couldn't control the battlefield, they would erase it. But humans didn't wait for orders to react. They were already moving. In the ruins of a communications hub, the medic from earlier pressed a bandage against a wounded fighter. You're not dying today, she said firmly. He gave a weak laugh, wasn't planning on it. Explosions echoed nearby. Closer. They're pushing in, someone called out. The mechanic looked up from his makeshift map. Good, he said. They're finally getting desperate. Desperate? The younger fighter asked, eyes wide. The mechanic met his gaze. Means they stopped understanding us. Above, Rook's cruiser screamed across the atmosphere again. Another pass. Another strike. Another fracture in the enemy's control. But the ship was failing. Visibly now. Chunks of armor burned away. Engine trails stuttered. It wouldn't last much longer. Everyone on the ground knew it. And yet, they fought harder. Not less. Sir, a Cathari officer said quietly, watching the battlefield data spiral into unpredictability. This is no longer a stabilization operation. The commander didn't respond immediately. His eyes remained fixed on the human movements, on the chaos that somehow functioned, on the disorder that refused to break. No, he said finally. It is not. Because this wasn't a defense. It wasn't a retreat. It wasn't even resistance. It was something far more dangerous. It was a species that refused to behave the way war demanded. A species that turned weakness into unpredictability. That turned disorganization into freedom. That turned survival into aggression. And as another Cathari unit vanished from the map. Not destroyed cleanly, but consumed in scattered, relentless engagement. The commander felt it again. That creeping, unwelcome realization. If this was how humans fought without their elite forces, without preparation, without command, without advantage, then what the Council had labeled as ordinary was anything but. And below, in the smoke and fire of Theta 9, the humans weren't just holding the line anymore. They were pushing it forward. Orbit was no longer a position. It was a battlefield that refused to stay still. Captain Elias Rook's cruiser drifted through fire and debris, its one solid structure now fractured, armor peeled back, internal frameworks exposed to the vacuum like bones through torn skin. Every system groaned under strain. Every second it remained intact felt borrowed. Reactor output unstable, the engineer shouted. We're past safety margins, way past. Rook didn't turn. His eyes stayed locked on Theta 9 below. Cities burned, but not silently anymore. They fought back. Status of ground resistance, he asked. Growing, the comms officer replied. Scattered but coordinated enough to disrupt Cathari movement. Rook nodded once. That was enough. It had to be. Then we hold. A pause fell across the bridge. Sir, someone said carefully. Rook finally looked up. If we leave, he said quietly, they lose momentum. If they lose momentum, they lose everything. No one argued. Because they understood the equation. This wasn't about survival anymore. It was about time. Below, time was measured differently. In breaths. In footsteps. In the split second between life and death. The medic wiped blood from her hands, barely noticing it wasn't all from the same person. They're regrouping, the mechanic said, watching a flickering map. Heavier units this time. They learned, the younger fighter muttered. Good, the mechanic replied. Means we hurt them. A distant rumble echoed through the ruins. Heavier footsteps. Cathari armored units. Bigger, slower, devastating. The kind of force meant to crush resistance outright. They're done playing, the medic said. The mechanic picked up his weapon. Then we stopped playing too. Cathari heavy infantry advanced through the broken streets like moving fortresses. Their armor absorbed small arms' fire effortlessly. Their weapons reduced entire structures to dust with single bursts. This was how they ended conflicts. Overwhelming force. Total control. Advance and clear, the commander ordered from orbit. No fragmentation, no deviation. For the first time since the invasion began. He sounded cautious. The humans didn't meet them head-on. At first, they vanished. Again, retreating through alleys, slipping through ruins, pulling back just enough to draw the Cathari deeper. Pursue, the Cathari squad leader commanded. Because retreat meant weakness. And weakness meant victory. They were wrong. The street narrowed. Collapsed structures funneled their movement. Sensors showed minimal resistance. Too minimal. Something off, one Cathari soldier said. Then, the ground detonated beneath them. Not a single explosion. A chain. Precise. Layered. The lead unit staggered as its footing collapsed, balance disrupted just long enough. For the next phase. From above, from below, from the sides. Humans attacked. Not with strength. With intent. Targeting joints in armor. Sensors. Mobility. Not trying to destroy the machines. Trying to cripple them. One heavy unit fell to a knee. Another turned too slowly, exposing its rear systems. And a human fighter slammed an explosive charge directly into the gap. The blast didn't destroy it. It didn't need to. The unit stopped moving. Adapt, the Cathari squad leader roared. But adaptation required understanding. And they still didn't understand. Back in orbit, Rook watched the battle unfold. Every flicker of resistance. Every small victory. Every loss. Sir, we're taking too much damage, the engineer warned again. Hull integrity dropped further. 35%. Systems failing one by one. We can't hold this position much longer. Rook's gaze hardened. Then we make this position matter. He stepped closer to the console. Reposition the ship. The helm officer hesitated. Sir, that puts us directly between their fleet and the surface. Rook didn't blink. I know. The cruiser shifted. Slowly at first. Then deliberately. Sliding into the worst possible place. Cathari targeting systems adjusted instantly. Human vessel repositioning, an officer reported. The commander studied the movement. Then his eyes widened just slightly. They're shielding the surface. Not intentionally. No shields left for that. But physically. Placing their damaged, dying ship in the line of fire. Fire, he ordered. The Cathari fleet unleashed another barrage. Blinding energy tore through space. And slammed into the human cruiser. Onboard chaos erupted. Direct hits across multiple decks. Structural failure imminent. Captain, we need to pull back now. Rook gripped the console as the ship shook violently. No, sir. No, he repeated. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to, because it carried something heavier than command. It carried decision. If they shoot us, he said, they're not shooting the ground. Silence. Then, understanding. Below, the effect was immediate. Cathari bombardment lessened. Not by choice. By obstruction. The human cruiser absorbed what was meant for the surface. Taking the damage. Buying seconds. Precious seconds. And the humans on the ground used every single one. They're covering us, the younger fighter said, staring at the burning sky. The mechanic didn't look up. Then we don't waste it. He reloaded, checked his weapon, and moved forward. Others followed, because something had shifted. Not just in tactics, in belief. The Cathari commander watched his fleet fire again. And again, each shot hitting the same target. The same broken ship. Still there, still in the way, still refusing to move. Why, one of his officers asked. Why would they sacrifice a vessel for a colony this insignificant? The commander didn't answer immediately. Because the answer didn't fit their logic. Didn't fit their models. Didn't fit anything they had assumed. Below, human forces began pushing. Not retreating. Not surviving. Advancing. Through fire. Through loss. Through exhaustion. The line wasn't holding anymore. It was moving. And in that moment, watching a dying ship shield a world it couldn't save alone. Watching ordinary soldiers fight like they had nothing left to lose. The Cathari commander felt it again. Stronger this time. Clearer. If this was their common army, then the term itself was meaningless. Because there was nothing common about a force willing to burn itself just to buy someone else a chance to stand. And as another volley struck the human cruiser, tearing deeper, breaking more, yet failing to push it aside, the commander realized something far worse than tactical failure. They hadn't just underestimated human strength. They had completely misunderstood human resolve. And that mistake was about to break them. Fear, to the Cathari, had always been a tool. They studied it, engineered it, deployed it with precision. Entire campaigns were designed not just to defeat enemies, but to make them feel defeat long before the final strike landed. Fear broke formations. Fear slowed reaction times. Fear ended wars early. But fear was never meant for them. Never something they experienced. Until now. Report, the Cathari commander demanded. His voice was steady, but the battlefield no longer was. Multiple units unresponsive. Ground formations collapsing in sectors 4 through 11. Resistance escalating beyond projected limits. Each update came faster than the last. Messier. Less controlled. How, one officer muttered. They have no command structure, no central coordination. The commander didn't answer, because he was watching it happen in real time. And there was coordination. Just not the kind they understood. On the ground, the humans had stopped reacting. They were initiating. The medic moved through the ruins, rifle slung across her back now, hands steady despite the chaos around her. Up, she told a wounded fighter, pulling him to his feet. You can still move. I'm hit, he gasped. I know, she said, so move anyway. There was no cruelty in her voice. Only urgency. Because stopping meant dying. And dying here meant leaving others exposed. Nearby, the mechanic adjusted a jury-rigged detonator. This will collapse the street when they push through, he said. The younger fighter nodded, watching the path ahead. They'll push, he said. Of course they will, the mechanic replied. They think we're retreating. A pause, then a faint, humorless smile. They still think this works like their wars. It didn't. A Cathari unit advanced cautiously through Sector 7. They had learned. They scanned every corner, every shadow, every possible trap. Their movements were slower now. Measured, careful. Fear hadn't broken them, but it had changed them. Contact left, one soldier shouted. Gunfire erupted. They responded instantly, clean, efficient, lethal. 2 human fighters dropped. Silence followed. Clear, another said. They moved forward, and the explosion tore through their flank. Not from where they had engaged, from where they hadn't looked. Another ambush. Another misdirection. Another failure to predict. Why do they keep advancing? A Cathari officer demanded over comms. They should be conserving resources, preserving manpower. But humans weren't calculating survival the same way. They weren't preserving themselves. They were preserving momentum. Above, Rook's cruiser groaned under another devastating hit. Captain, we're losing structural cohesion. Sections are collapsing. Rook barely registered the words. His focus remained on the tactical display. On the ground movements. On the way human forces were no longer scattered. They were converging. You see that? He asked quietly. The comms officer leaned closer. They're pushing inward. Rook nodded. They're not just fighting back anymore. A beat. They're hurting them. The realization spread slowly. Then all at once. They're controlling engagement zones, the Cathari commander said, voice lower now. No longer dismissive. No longer confident. Impossible, one of his officers replied. They lack centralized command. They don't need it, the commander interrupted. His gaze darkened. They're thinking the same way, without being told to. That was the moment fear changed shape. Because fear wasn't just about what the enemy did. It was about what they might do next. And humans had become unpredictable. On the ground, the younger fighter reloaded with shaking hands. They're pulling back again, he said. The mechanic shook his head. No. He pointed at the map. They're pulling them in. The medic looked up. Into what? The mechanic didn't answer immediately. Because the answer wasn't comforting. Everything we have left, he said finally. Across Theta 9, human resistance shifted. Not outward. Inward. Drawing Cathari forces deeper into a tightening circle. Street by street. Block by block. Each retreat calculated. Each loss traded. They're compressing the battlefield, a Cathari officer reported. Why, another asked. They're outnumbered. This reduces their maneuverability. The commander's expression hardened. No, he said slowly. It reduces ours. Because in close quarters, precision lost its advantage. Overwhelming force became harder to deploy. And chaos favored the humans. A Cathari squad rounded a corner and came face to face with 3 human fighters. Close. Too close. There was no time for formation. No time for perfect aim. Just instinct. Gunfire erupted. Brutal. Immediate. One Cathari dropped. Then another. The last one fired, hitting one of the humans. But the others didn't fall back. Didn't hesitate. They kept advancing, even as one of them bled out beside them. The Cathari soldier stepped back. For the first time, he hesitated. That hesitation cost him everything. They don't stop, a Cathari voice whispered over the comms. Not a report. A realization. Above, the council feeds showed it all. The shifting lines. The collapsing formations. The slow, undeniable change. They are not behaving as projected, one analyst said. No, another replied quietly. They're behaving worse. Because this wasn't just resistance anymore. It wasn't just defiance. It was pressure. Relentless. Unyielding. Closing in. Rook leaned back slightly as another explosion rocked the cruiser. Sir, we're nearing total systems failure. He nodded. I know. Below, the battlefield tightened further. Cathari forces compressed into fewer zones. Their movements restricted. Their options shrinking. They're almost in position, Rook said. Position for what? The comms officer asked. Rook didn't answer, because he wasn't entirely sure. He just knew one thing. Humans didn't fight like this without a reason. And as the Cathari commander watched his forces being pushed, not back, but inward, as he felt control slipping further with every passing second. The fear that had once been a tool became something else entirely. It became personal, because for the first time in his career, he wasn't planning the end of a battle. He was trying to understand one, and he was running out of time to do it. Below, the humans made their final adjustment. One last shift. One last pull. The trap was almost closed, and the Cathari still didn't see it. Not fully. Not yet. But they would. Too late, the battlefield had a rhythm now. Not clean, not ordered, but undeniable. Everything moved toward a single point. Captain Elias Rook felt it before he saw it. Not through sensors. Through instinct. Through the way the fight below had changed. "They're closing it," he said quietly. "Sir," the comms officer asked. Rook leaned forward, eyes locked on the tactical display. Every movement, every fallback, every push, it's all leading somewhere. A pause. "Where?" the helm officer asked. Rook didn't answer immediately, because the answer came with a cost. Directly under us. Silence filled the bridge. Then the realization hit all at once. Below, the humans had done the impossible. They had turned chaos into direction. Cathari forces, superior in numbers, training, and firepower, had been slowly compressed into a single operational zone. A killing ground. Not by overwhelming force, but by constant pressure. By never giving them space to breathe. "Enemy concentration confirmed," a Cathari officer reported. "We are regrouping." The commander's eyes narrowed. "Regrouping," he repeated. The word felt wrong. Like something was missing. Because they weren't regrouping. They were being guided. "Pull back outer units," the commander ordered sharply. "Re-establish perimeter control." "Unable," came the response almost instantly. "Movement routes compromised, resistance blocking multiple vectors." Another alert. Supply access fully severed. Another. Command relays failing intermittently. The commander's grip tightened on the console. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't random. This was design. On the ground, the mechanic crouched behind a collapsed transport, watching the final movements unfold on his cracked display. "They're all in," he said. The medic didn't look up as she secured a bandage. "Then this is it." The younger fighter swallowed hard. "This is where we stop them." The mechanic shook his head. "No." He looked toward the sky. "This is where we end it." Above them, Rook's cruiser was dying. There was no denying it now. Entire sections had gone dark. Internal fires burned unchecked. The hull groaned like it was ready to tear itself apart. "Captain," the engineer's voice cracked. "Reactor integrity is failing. We're minutes from catastrophic breach." Rook nodded slowly. "Understood. Sir, we need to evacuate." "There's nowhere to go," Rook said calmly. "No panic. No hesitation. Just truth." The crew fell silent, because they already knew. Escape pods wouldn't make it through the battlefield. Even if they did, there was no guarantee of survival. "Target confirmation?" Rook asked. The weapons officer's hands hovered over the console. "They're concentrated in one zone, exactly as predicted." "Predicted," someone whispered. Rook didn't correct it, because it hadn't been his plan. It had been theirs. The people on the ground. The ones fighting without orders. Without certainty. Without guarantees. "We're just finishing it," Rook said. On the Cathari command ship, alarms blared louder than before. "Energy spike detected." "Source," the commander demanded. "All readings indicate the human cruiser." He looked up. The damaged vessel hung above the battlefield. Broken. Burning. Still there. Still refusing to leave. "What are they doing?" an officer asked. The commander didn't answer, because he was starting to understand. They're not holding position anymore, the officer added. They're losing orbit. On the human cruiser, gravity shifted. Systems failed in sequence. The ship began to drift. Then tilt. Then fall. Helm, Rook asked. No control left, sir. Good, he replied. The crew exchanged glances. Not of fear. Of acceptance. Align trajectory manually, Rook ordered. Guide us in. Sir, the helm officer hesitated. That will. I know what it will do. Rook's voice was steady. Do it anyway. Outside, the cruiser's descent became visible. A burning streak cutting through the atmosphere. Not debris. Not wreckage. A choice. On the surface, humans looked up. Some froze. Some whispered. Some understood instantly. They're coming down, the younger fighter said, voice shaking. The mechanic didn't look away. I know. That's our ship. Yeah. A long pause. They're not pulling out. The medic exhaled slowly. Then stood. Then we don't either. Across the battlefield, Cathari forces began to realize the same thing. What is it doing? One soldier demanded. It's not retreating. It's not attacking. It was falling. The commander stared at the incoming vessel. Calculations ran through his mind at impossible speed. Impact vectors. Blast radius. Energy output. And then, understanding. Move all units out of the impact zone, he ordered. Now. But it was too late. Because movement required time. And time was the one thing humans had taken from them. The humans on the ground didn't retreat. Didn't scatter. Didn't run. They advanced, driving the Cathari forces further inward. Keeping them trapped. Keeping them exactly where they needed to be. They're forcing us to stay, a Cathari officer shouted. Why would they? The answer roared from the sky. Rook stood at the center of the bridge as flames consumed the outer hull. The heat bled through. The air itself felt like it was burning. Final weapons check, he said. Barely functional, the weapons officer replied. Enough. A pause. Yes. Rook nodded. Then we make it count. Below, the Cathari commander looked up at the descending inferno. For the first time since the invasion began. There was no calculation. No strategy. No certainty. Only realization. They're not trying to win this battle, he whispered. They're trying to make sure we lose it. On the cruiser, the final command echoed across the bridge. Fire everything. Every remaining weapon discharged. A storm of destruction raining down into the concentrated Cathari forces below. And then, the ship itself followed. A falling star. A burning weapon. A final decision. The ground shook before impact even came. The air screamed. The sky itself seemed to split. And as the Cathari commander watched the inevitable descend upon him. As the humans on the ground stood their ground instead of fleeing. He understood something far too late. This wasn't desperation. This was intent. And there was no escaping it. The cruiser hit. And the world exploded for a moment. There was nothing. No sound. No movement. No war. The explosion swallowed everything. Light erased shape. Heat erased distinction. The impact of the falling cruiser didn't just strike the surface of Theta 9, it rewrote it. Buildings vanished. Streets folded. The air itself became fire. Then came the silence. Heavy. Absolute. Unnatural. Ash fell like snow. Slow. Endless. Where the Cathari stronghold once stood, there was now a crater, vast, jagged, still glowing at its core. Twisted fragments of alien armor lay scattered like broken monuments to certainty. Nothing moved inside it. Nothing could. At the edge of the blast zone, A hand pushed through the dust. Shaking, bleeding, alive. The younger fighter coughed violently as he dragged himself forward, lungs burning with every breath. "Move," he rasped to himself. Not a command. A reminder. Nearby, the mechanic staggered to his feet, one arm hanging useless at his side. He looked toward the crater, eyes narrowing through the haze. They did it," he whispered. The medic stumbled out from behind collapsed debris, face smeared with ash, hands still trembling from instinctively trying to save lives that were already gone. Her eyes lifted to the sky. Empty now. No burning ship. No streak of fire. Just silence. "They stayed," she said softly. No one answered. Because they all knew. Across the battlefield, the same scene repeated. Humans emerging from ruin. From cover. From places they shouldn't have survived. Broken. Exhausted. But standing. Cathari survivors were rare. A few staggered at the outer edges of the blast. Disoriented. Damaged. Their armor cracked, their movements slow, uncertain. One of them raised his weapon instinctively. Then hesitated, because across from him stood a human. Wounded, barely upright, weapon lowered, but eyes steady. The Cathari soldier calculated the distance. The odds, the outcome. Then something unfamiliar happened. He lowered his weapon, not out of mercy, not out of strategy, but because, for the first time, he wasn't sure he could win. Above Theta 9, the void was quiet. The Cathari fleet, what remained of it, had pulled back. Not in formation. Not in control. Just away. "Command ship is retreating," one Cathari officer reported weakly. The commander didn't respond. He stood in silence, staring at the image of the surface. At the crater. At the absence where his forces had once been. "They sacrificed a warship," the officer continued, voice unsteady, "for a localized victory." The commander's gaze didn't shift. "No," he said quietly. "That wasn't a sacrifice." A pause. Confusion. That was a decision. Because sacrifice implied loss. Implied regret. Implied something taken unwillingly. This had been chosen. "They turned defeat into a weapon," the commander said slowly. "And we walked directly into it." On the ground, human survivors gathered. Not in celebration. Not in triumph. In silence. They looked toward the crater. Toward the place where the cruiser had fallen. Where Captain Rook and everyone aboard had made their final stand. "They bought us time," the mechanic said. The younger fighter shook his head. "No." He stared at the horizon. "They gave us a chance." The medic closed her eyes briefly. Then opened them again. Clear. Focused. "Then we don't waste it," she said. Around them, others nodded. Some limped forward. Some leaned on each other. Some simply stood and watched. But none of them broke. Hours later, human reinforcement ships arrived. Sleek. Undamaged. Powerful. Too late to fight. Right on time to witness. Dropships descended carefully onto the scarred surface. Soldiers stepped out. Expecting resistance. Expecting chaos. Instead, they found something else. A battlefield that had already decided its outcome. One officer walked slowly toward the crater's edge. He stopped, stared down into the glowing remains, then turned to the survivors nearby. "What unit held this line?" he asked. The mechanic gave a short, tired laugh. "Unit." He shook his head. "Whoever was left." The officer frowned. "That's not possible." The medic met his gaze. "It is," she said. A long silence followed. Another soldier stepped forward, scanning the damage reports. "The enemy force," he began, then stopped. His expression shifted. They outnumbered you 10-1. No one responded, because numbers didn't matter anymore. The younger fighter looked past them all, up into the sky. They thought only your best soldiers were dangerous, he said quietly. The officer followed his gaze. And he asked. The younger fighter's voice didn't rise. Didn't need to. They were wrong. Far above, aboard the retreating Cathari command ship, the commander stood alone. The battlefield feed still active, still showing the aftermath. He replayed the final moments. The descent, the impact, the way human forces had moved toward it, not away. They didn't try to survive, he murmured, because survival hadn't been the objective. Victory had, and they had achieved it, at a cost the Cathari could not comprehend. Signal the council, he ordered at last. What will you report? An officer asked carefully. The commander didn't hesitate. The truth. A pause. And that is. He looked once more at the ruined battlefield, at the humans still standing among the ashes. And for the first time since the war began, there was no arrogance left in his voice. Those were not their elite forces. Silence. Then quietly, they were just the ones who showed up. And somehow, that was worse, the Galactic Council chamber was silent. Not the comfortable silence of certainty. Not the measured quiet of calculated superiority. This was different. Heavy. Uneasy. The same chamber that had once echoed with quiet amusement now held something far more fragile. Doubt. Begin report, the High Arbiter said at last. His voice carried authority, but not confidence. The Cathari commander stood at the center of the chamber, his form dimmer than before, movement slower. Changed, not by defeat alone, but by understanding. The operation on Theta 9 has concluded, he began. No embellishment. No attempt to soften the outcome. We have lost the system. A ripple moved through the chamber. Not outrage. Not disbelief. Something quieter. Processing. That is unexpected, one counselor said carefully. Explain the failure parameters. The commander didn't react to the wording. Failure parameters. As if this could still be reduced to data. We deployed a standard expeditionary force, he said. Initial engagement proceeded within projections. Surface resistance was minimal. Defensive infrastructure was neutralized. He paused. Then a single human vessel entered the system. Murmurs spread. One ship, another counselor asked. Yes. That was your turning point, the Arbiter pressed. The commander met his gaze. No. Silence. That was merely the beginning. The chamber stilled again. Because the tone had changed. The vessel did not attempt conventional engagement, the commander continued. It did not prioritize survival. It did not adhere to recognized tactical doctrine. A flicker of recorded footage appeared. The cruiser damaged, burning, driving directly into Cathari formations. It targeted supply chains, communication nodes, reinforcement vectors. Another shift in the display. Ground combat. Human resistance. Unstructured. Unpredictable. Effective. They adapted continuously, the commander said. They operated without centralized command, without reliance on hierarchy. Each unit, each individual responded to the battlefield independently. That is inefficient, a counselor interrupted. The commander's gaze sharpened. No, he said. It is uncontrollable. The chamber fell silent again. Explain, the Arbiter demanded. They could not be predicted, the commander said. They could not be forced into patterns. They did not break when expected. They did not retreat when logic dictated. Another image appeared. Humans advancing through fire. Carrying wounded. Fighting even as they fell. They continued, he said quietly. The word lingered, even when it no longer benefited their survival. A pause. Why? One counselor asked. The commander didn't answer immediately. Because the answer wasn't simple. Because survival was not their objective, he said finally. Victory was. The chamber shifted uneasily. Define victory, the arbiter pressed. The commander turned toward the final recording. The descent of the human cruiser. The impact. The annihilation of concentrated Cathari forces. They redefined it, he said. Silence. They sacrificed a warship, one counselor said, attempting to regain control of the narrative. A costly but irrational maneuver. No, the commander replied again. That was not irrational. The counselor hesitated. It was inevitable. That word hit differently. Clarify, the arbiter said. The commander stepped closer to the projection. They created conditions where that outcome was the only one left, he explained. They shaped the battlefield until our forces were exactly where they needed them to be. A pause. Then they ended it. The chamber dimmed slightly as the recording faded. And these were their elite forces, another counselor asked. The commander didn't look at him. No. A long silence followed. Because they already knew the answer. These were not their specialized units, the commander continued. They were not their most advanced soldiers. Another pause. They were not their best. The words settled over the chamber like weight. Then what were they? The arbiter asked quietly. The commander finally turned. And for the first time since the session began. There was something in his voice the council had never heard before. Respect. They were what remained, he said. Another silence. Then, understanding. Slow. Uncomfortable. Complete. If this is their baseline, one counselor whispered. No one finished the thought. Because they didn't need to. The implications spread across the chamber like a shadow. Humans did not rely on elite units to win wars. They did not require perfect conditions. They did not collapse under pressure. They adapted. They endured. They escalated. Individually. Collectively. Relentlessly. They do not fight as a military force alone, the commander said. They fight as a species. That was the moment everything changed. Because wars were not won against individuals. Or units. Or fleets. They were won against systems. And humanity was not a system the council understood. What is your recommendation? The arbiter asked. The commander didn't hesitate. Do not engage them under incomplete assumptions. A pause. That is not a strategy, the arbiter said. No, the commander replied. It is a warning. Silence. Because for the first time in their long history, the Galactic Council wasn't discussing how to win a war. They were considering whether they should start one at all. Far away on Theta 9, the fires were finally dying. The sky was clear again. The survivors stood among the ruins. Not celebrating. Not mourning. Preparing. Because they knew something the Council had only just begun to understand. This wasn't